those of you who are familiar with me at all know that I am really drawn to the four main asteroid goddesses, asteroid dwarf planets, Ceres being the dwarf planet, including, I'm also interested in Haumea and Makemake and all the Kuiper Belt objects. But for me, the four main goddesses draw me very, very deeply and very, very strongly. Not because I want to differentiate myself and it would be cool to do the asteroid goddesses to do that. It's literally more of a compulsion within me. It's something that I've just discovered over the last several years as I go deeper into my own inner work, that they are really, really speaking loudly to me for my own journey. And so whatever I can impart from my digested intimacy with them in any way, may it serve. And that's why I'm interested in bringing you all together here with me and sharing on this Aries Ingress. Okay, crossing the divide. Why did I choose crossing the divide? And of course, this is the image of the ram as in Aries. And this is the image of the two fish, the constellation of the fish, swimming in opposite directions, right? So the beginning of the zodiac and the end of the zodiac. I'll explain in a moment. So crossing what? Beginnings, endings, the masculine and the feminine, the individual and the social and the transpersonal, light and shadow, head and heart. So we're going to start with the lunar nodes because, as many of you or most of you know, as an evolutionary astrologer, I am intimately or always looking at the nodal axis and their dispositors as how I contextualize the chart. So we can look at any and all of these aspects and see a multiplicity of different ways of delineating any of these signatures. But I am looking specifically at the nodal axis, the current nodal axis that we are all under the influence of, to tell me what everything is ultimately in service to, okay? Because that helps me contextualize how I'm going to share and why I'm going to share the information that I share today. So I call it the rudder of the chart, the nodal axis here, okay? So the lunar nodes entered Taurus and Scorpio in mid-January of 2022, and they'll be leaving to enter Aries, Libra, in July 18th, 2023. So the lunar nodes are always traversing one sign approximately 19 months. I'm sorry, two signs, the polarity of two signs. Every 19 months or so, they switch. This nodal axis is ruled by Venus, the ruler of Taurus, and Mars, the ruler of Scorpio, the south node. And just for those of you who are maybe not as well versed in astrology, the nodes are the points of intersection between the moon's orbit and the ecliptic plane. The ecliptic plane is the perceived path of the sun in our skies, okay? So it's a nodal point, a knot, tying together the moon, the most personal component aspect of our being, with the sun, our solar aspect, the most impersonal aspect of our being, right? The personal and the objective, the subjective and objective. And the north node is always searching to have a new experience of the sign energy that the node is in. So even if there are other planets already in the sign that the north node is in, the intention, the evolutionary intention of the north node is to have a pristine experience or a pure experience, meaning not unsullied, but full experience of the energy of whatever the sign it's in this case, Taurus. It wants to have a full spectrum experience of this energy in a way that it hasn't felt it or known it before. And I say full spectrum because we are always part of a polarity in the 3D plane. So full spectrum, meaning that Taurus includes at its center Scorpio, at its heart. And similarly for Scorpio, Scorpio at its heart holds Taurus. They are different, completely different polarities of one axis. So the South Node, in contrast, is where we have an amalgam of experience that is full of habits, karma, what we know, what's been deemed safe and secure for us. So the South Node energy is interested in releasing the stuck energies of the sign consciousness in which it's in. So unless we venture toward the North Node to have these new experiences of this sign energy, we're going to remain, and our tendency as human beings is to always remain in what we know. We're going to remain stuck, especially in a fixed sign like Scorpio. The tendency to remain stuck is very, very strong. The tendency to double down and try to control is very, very strong, but we'll get into more of that later. So the more we venture into what we don't know, then the more the energies of the South Node come into balance, and we leave behind the dross or transmute the dross into a higher expression, a more full and mature expression of the Scorpio energies. Okay, but by default, this is where we have our habits and patterns, where we are stuck collectively, and where we're hiding from ourselves still, or not wanting to admit, in this case, the shadow. Scorpio has a lot to do with the shadow. It has a lot to do with diving deep into the undercurrents. Depth psychology is a Scorpio aspect. Scorpio is also a feminine sign. It's ruled by Mars. Mars is the traditional ruler of Scorpio. It's Mars's feminine side, Mars's feminine nature. And holistic or more mature aspects, well, before I get there, some of the more immature aspects of Scorpio is secrecy, manipulation, what's occluded, what's kept hidden, mostly from myself, control, fear, refusal to change. Paradoxically, Scorpio, as the sign most closely associated with the evolutionary impulse, can also be in its shadow element a refusal, an absolute refusal to change. In its more heightened manifestations, Scorpio is the capacity to stay in our shadow experiences and what we have been occluding from us, what we haven't wanted to know, to stay lovingly with an open heart and allow the transmutation of the shadow to happen and reveal our true, authentic power. That's another thing that Scorpio in its shadow is. It's power. But it's power over, rather than the simple power that is a part of the universe. And I am a part of the universe, so I have power flowing naturally through me. It is not mine, but I can be intimate with it. So I think I didn't go over the some of the iterations of what Taurus is. Again, hopefully briefly. Taurus, in its less mature aspects, can be stuckness, it can be rigidity, fixity, it can be wanting to only stay with what's comfortable, what's safe, whether that be people in relationships, whether it be the types of foods that I eat, whether it be the type of sensations that I will allow to experience. These sensations are okay, these are not. And this all happens very, very quickly, right? It can also be my sense of values, but a limitation in my sense of values and what I feel like is worthy of me and what's not worthy of me. Taurus can also be self-worth, how I value myself. And if we have if we have Taurus in planets in Scorpio natally, for example, that are still somewhat in shadow, there can be issues with my value. There can be body issues with Taurus as well. Food issues. The spectrum of Scorpio and Taurus can be food-related issues, whether it be food sensitivity or anorexia, bulimia, things of that nature. But in its exalted or in its more coherent aspect, Taurus is fecundity. It is our sensual nature. It is the value of having a body, having a sensate experience of loving the earth, of feeling our connection to the earth, feeling our stability and our solidity in body, in ground, in mind, in our being, an ease of being me. Now, by no means is this an exhaustive list, but I wanted to continue on and just give these as an example for those who are not as well versed in the astrological signatures of Taurus and Scorpio. Okay, and Taurus is ruled by Venus. And this is one of the things that makes this Ingress chart so amazing. It's there we have the ruler of the North Node with the North Node. It's quite exquisite. So the North Node here in Taurus, especially with the Venus accentuating it here, and I'll come in with Juno in a minute and what this star is, but it's about renewing our connection to what's natural, what's organic, what's simple, what's innately pleasurable, sensual, fecund, all these words that I mentioned before, stable and sustainable. So the nodal axis, as we know, has been in these two signs since mid-January of last year. So we've been undergoing this invitation for some time. As the nodes, because they move backwards in the chart, right? We began at 29 degrees Taurus and 29 degrees Scorpio. They're becoming more concentrated because the seed, the pith, the bija of all of the signs is at the very, very first degree. So it's literally like we're being squeezed. It can get really, really uncomfortable, especially if we're talking about Scorpio South Node, which Scorpio is also about elimination. So it can be the refusal to eliminate, the refusal to let go of how we've known ourselves, how we've known power, how we've needed to manipulate energetically to get what we want in secret. So we're feeling this squeeze. There's so much intensity. And part of that is this nodal axis here. Okay. The South Node here is on this star called Sirma. And when you hear me reading about any of the stars here, I'm taking their interpretations from a man who passed a couple years ago. Beautiful man. His name is Nick Fiorenza, an amazing astrologer, a sidereal astrologer. And he has a book called Astronomical Astrology that I highly recommend. And so the star information comes from him. So Sirma holds a resonance that brings to the surface emotional patterning activated from trauma, particularly past trauma, and according to Nick, from other lifetimes where there were cataclysmic events on the human plane. Okay? Sirma inspires the use of the art sciences to unlock our frozen coding so that we may transmute our behavioral patterns and continue our evolutionary awakening. So one of the reasons why we're feeling this literally like a bottleneck of energy, it's getting so intense, well, it continues to intensify, is because we're all going through on some level collective trauma that's beyond race, beyond gender, beyond familial and ancestral. It's species wide. And because we remember the human race, this is embedded in the collective unconscious in all of us. Okay? So there's just this generalized trauma response, and we don't need to know how or why it originated in order for us to be aware of it and gently allow ourselves the room to breathe, that we're not in it alone. This is a collective thing that we're going through here. Okay? And it's not a punishment. It is just the reality of where we've wanted to suppress or needed to suppress this trauma until it was time. And all of us here, in one way, shape, or form, in our own way, are dealing or are not dealing with it perfectly. So the art sciences here that Nick talks about. Art science is the balancing of scientific and creative energies to enhance one's own life. It's also the balancing of subjectivity and objectivity. Art sciences. Astrology is an art science, right? It's a science in the sense that it's rooted in astronomical reality, but it's an art because it also requires an intimacy of the astrologer to be able to receive the information and interpret it. So it's a universal, it uses universal principles that are objective, but it's very, very subjective and intimate in the sense that it's uniquely metabolized, alchemized, and spoken through whomever the astrologer is. So astrology is actually a very good example of what art science is. Now, the North Node here is with a star called Sheridan. Sheridan supports new beginnings, adventure, transmutation, and great rewards. It impels us to initiate personal action to take the lead in our individual lives. Sounds good, huh? Sounds pretty good to me. Now, of course, as you all know, I'm speaking to an audience of mature people who are no doubt interested in personal growth, shadow work, however that looks and feels for you. This is not a dispensation from above, right? We have to do our work. We have to engage. We have to be willing to go into the unknown North Node in order to reap the rewards. But the call to action is here. The call to action is available to us, however we choose to dial in and listen. Okay, so aspects to the nodes. I hope everybody can see the chart here, the full chart. Okay, so we have Saturn in Pisces trining the South Node. So even though Saturn is in relationship with both nodes, because the nodes move clockwise, the last node to touch Saturn was actually the North Node. So Saturn is more influenced, you could say, more under the influence of the South Node tendencies than the North Node. Okay, this is good to bear in mind, and this is the case for all the planets here, which we're going to go through here. But discerning whether a planet was last touched by whichever node it was last touched by gives added context to how we interpret the planet, right? What we're defaulting to. So there's a greater temptation then to return to fear and double down on control, right? Versus being drawn to allow natural processes of decay and dying, because really we are witnessing another iteration of, now this is going to sound dramatic, but I don't mean for it to be. Civilization as we know it is coming apart at the seams. I'm not the first to say it. I won't be the last to say it. This is an opportunity, and it's going to take some time. It's going to take quite a while. It's not happening overnight, although there is some acceleration depending on how sensitive we are. But this is the collapsing of certain timelines, Saturn, right? Creating chaos versus more rapid and expedient receiving and integrating of past lessons in response to evolutionary impulse. So again, either one of these options is on the table. the temptation to return to fear, or allowing natural processes of decay and dying. Both of them are on the table. Which one we're choosing at any one moment is up to us. Okay? The collapsing timeline situation, creating more chaos versus rapid and expedient receiving. Taurus is very, very much about receiving. The feminine in general is about receiving. I'm going to share more about that in a moment. But Taurus, especially as the earth sign, the instinctual sign of Venus, receiving and integrating of past lessons in response to the evolutionary impulse. Okay. So Saturn is also quincunx Ceres. And there's going to be a whole slide dedicated to Ceres, Black Moon Lilith, and Eris. But for now, I'm just going to say the quincunx is the aspect of no relationship, seemingly. And yet everything is in relationship. But the quincunx is uncomfortable because we're aware that we're not aware of something. Or we can't put our finger on what we're not aware of. And it creates a low level but pervasive anxiety in our system. And we're always constantly looking out for what is it that we are not aware of, that we need to take care of and address, fix, heal, whatever, that's not being addressed. So Ceres is kind of the, her quincunx to Saturn is an indication of this, again, low level. There's something coming. There's something that we're being invited into, but we don't know what it is yet. And so because we don't know what it is and we like to stay with what we know, we're going to see it as a threat. And Ceres can also be in her imbalanced expression. And when her energies are being used as a way to control and manipulate, especially a population, she can be propaganda. Ceres is very much the mothering impulse, the impulse to nurture. But before she can be that, or before on her shadow element, how does she nurture? Propaganda, nurturing. I'm getting this from Elias Lonsdale, by the way. Elias Lonsdale, I apologize. He wrote a book called Inner Planets. Very, very interesting book. Highly recommend. He speaks about the asteroid goddesses and all of their potential manifestations and iterations. And he calls Ceres the propaganda of the masses, the consumerist, the drive for consumerist culture. And especially because she's in relationship with Saturn here, related, one of the social planets, cultural planets, there's even more of this sort of who's controlling the narrative, as I write here. And by the way, whatever is highlighted here is just a notation for me to refer to my notes. Okay. So, quick note here. Those of you who have watched my Ceres video on YouTube or heard me speak of Ceres in any way know that I make a big stink about the January 2020 conjunction that took place, that most astrologers were talking about. The big deal was Saturn and Pluto and the Sun conjunct in Capricorn. But what most didn't pay attention to, because very few people pay attention to Ceres, is that Ceres was right there with them. Right there with the big boys, taking her place. Okay? And that was in January of 2020. And remember what I just said about Ceres and propaganda, according to Elias Lonsdale. And what happened just a couple months later? This is not a political statement. I'm just stating what the astrology and some astrologers have said. The advent of COVID and the pandemic. Okay? And fear. A lot of fear. Okay. Mars here. I'm going to move on to Mars. Mars is out of bounds. He has been out of bounds for, let's see, I think 5 of the 7 months that he's been in Gemini. He's been in Gemini a long time. He spends a long time when he's retrograde, and some signs more than others, and it's too, this is not the webinar for that, but he's still out of bounds, and he's in a sextile to the North Node and in a trine to the South Node. But because he was last touched by the North Node, or he last touched the North Node, he could be more influenced by the North Node, but here's the tricky part. Mars is the ruler of the South Node. So Mars is the wild card here. Mars is kind of the energy of everything is hinging on Mars in a strange way, but not so strange way. Again, because he's valenced toward the North Node, but he also has, loyalty, you could say. And Scorpio can also be strong loyalty, especially to tribe and family. Loyalty to the Scorpio South Node. So his entire retrograde period, he's been out of bounds. I want to show here. This is the image I wanted to show you of Mars is retrograde. Mars went retrograde here, between the horns of the celestial bull. And what's interesting about the celestial bull, it's a bull, but it was revered by the ancients, many ancient cultures, as a symbol of the feminine. Okay, so remember that. The celestial bull is a symbol of the feminine, and Mars doing his whole retrograde period within the horns of the bull. Okay, and where Mars is going to be when he's at the Ingress chart here. Let me close this down now. Mars is right now, or he will be at tomorrow when the Ingress happens, in between the south node of the bull called Alheka and the shoulder of Bet El Goose. Okay, Bet El Goose in the Hunter. Bet El Goose implies it has a kingly nature. And again, this is coming from Nick Fiorenza, a warm, fatherly, kingly nature, wanting only the best from humanity and leading from the heart. Okay, so this is the star that you see here next to Mars that Mars is applying to. And yet he just came from Alheka, the southern horn of the bull. And Alheka is all about fighting antiquated battles. So Mars is literally our wild card. It all hinges on Mars, which is our masculine. So we have a really wild, out of bound Mars, way out of bounds of the kingdom and the king and anybody. He's literally just kind of rogue, maverick, okay, our inner masculine. He's just coming from Alheka, fighting antiquated battles, but he's moving toward Bet El Goose, leading like a king from one's heart for the betterment of humanity. And he's touched by the North Node, but influenced by the South. So this is a really potent Mars here, really potent thing to consider and sit with, where Mars is in our own chart, what Mars and Gemini here is touching in our chart, everything that's going on here, okay? And just as a note, he is in what is called the Mars Destiny Challenge phase, according to astrologer Adam Gainsberg and his work with the Mars cycle, okay? It's a 15-day phase, not a very long phase, but it's when Mars is squaring the sun, which he's also doing, right? What are we working in alignment with? Our lower will or our greater will? And Mars also in a quincunx, no relationship with Pluto. Interestingly enough, Pluto is the higher octave in some cases of Mars. Is Mars in relationship with our higher, deeper will in the aspect that Pluto represents in that respect? So Mars in trine to Saturn, the malefics, supposedly in ancient traditional astrology, they're the malefics. They're supporting each other, but are they supporting extreme dissociation? Saturn in Pisces, Mars way, way out of bounds, right? Or are they supporting each other to adult? Are they adulting? Will we be adulting in this signature? Will we be initiating ourselves into the strength to make choices that are not just fighting antiquated battles, that are not just about fighting the status quo, but about choosing to build and rebuild from our heart, from our kingly, queenly wisdom for the natural evolution that we are being drawn and called to. So Mars is so far out of the realm of current reality consensus, this could initiate an opportunity for us to surrender our heads to our hearts and our haras. Hara being, for a woman, also the womb space, for a man, the dantian, right? The hara is the general term for the lower belly in both women and men. And a reminder that the Roman Mars, which of course we always refer to the Greek myths oddly, but the planets are named with their Roman names. The Roman Mars was protector of agriculture, defender of local municipalities, Gemini. So protecting the terrain, our inner terrain of what is sacred, what is true, and what is sovereign for ourselves and for the collective. And Ceres, being the goddess of agriculture, the goddess who gifted agriculture to humankind, also being an earth associated with Virgo, Mars was known in Hindu mythology as, in one aspect, as the son of the earth. So is Mars remembering his ties as the son of the earth? Mars is not the son of Ceres, by the way, in the myth. I'm not trying to imply that, but just the whole idea of the North Node in Taurus, Mars squaring Ceres in a T-square here with the sun and Ceres. Again, so much hinges on our Mars, on this Mars. Then we have Pluto squaring the nodal axis, right? And here I'm going to refer to my notes. He's at the fulcrum point here, right? At the bendings, you could say. He's in a closer relationship with the South Node because he was last touched by or touching the South Node energy. So again, as the modern ruler of Scorpio, we are really heavily valenced here with Pluto wanting to go with what's known, wanting to double down and control, continue to control the narrative, especially at the 29th degree of Capricorn. Oh my gosh, it's like being held in a vice. So Capricorn itself is the lure, with Pluto there, the lure of history, of what's known, of false safety systems, like control grids or covert agencies, right? Using fear and other tactics to poison the waters and suck every last ounce of moisture from the sea goat, Capricorn. Remember, I spoke of fecundity. Remember, I spoke about, I'm introducing again for people who aren't familiar with the sign, the actual emblem of Capricorn is not just the goat, it is the sea goat. Its tail is sourced within the waters of Cancer, right? So refecundating. How much are we refecundating? Bringing back moisture, bringing back oxygen to where we are in this vice grip of control, both externally, but also inwardly. This is so much, it's all about the inner journey, to be honest. And the outer journey is a reflection of what we haven't wanted to see. All this shadow coming up because we haven't wanted to see. And all this fighting because of how we have, to whatever extent we have, some of us more than others, suppressed and said no to change. I'm not going to change. This is happening very unconsciously. We're talking about the shadow, right? So this is beneath what we are even aware of that we're doing. So again, it requires a Mars so far out of the realm of what's known to make a new choice. But is it going to be dissociative or is it going to be grounded in the vision of Earth, what he's been entrusted to be defending and hold sacred? So Venus is here next to the North Node, in her home sign, as we mentioned, and with Juno. So all of the goddesses in one way, shape, or form are in my experience, are devotional to something. One of the things that is the part of the crystal facet of the wisdom intelligence of Juno is the devotion to other with a capital O as a temporary placeholder for that beloved or other in me. So Juno is very, very much about devotion to the beloved. What is the beloved? In this case, our sensual immediacy of how good it feels to be here now in this life, receiving, transmuting, changing, not changing, and feeling the pleasure of it, feeling the disdain, feeling the hurt, whatever our human experience is. This is our devotion, is to re-engendering ourselves to an endogenous wisdom of our bodies connected to the earth. And they're trine Black Moon Lilith here in Leo, and she's retrograde, right? So this is feminine sovereignty here to me. And again, this is not just women. Feminine sovereignty exists in men as well, right? Masculine and feminine are not gender specific here. So Black Moon Lilith retrograde here, sextile the South Node, but being touched most recently by the North Node. Is it supporting the uninhibiting of our feminine shadow, which can be manipulation, jealousy, with Juno can also represent jealousy, gossip, energetic entanglements, narcissism. These are shadows of the feminine shadows, right? Or is it supporting the uninhibiting of the feminine shadow, or are we going to continue to suppress the feminine shadow and let it wreak havoc, which is what the shadow does when it hasn't been addressed, right? And all this signature is, so much of what's happening here is in preparation for the next Venus and Leo cycle, which is coming in August. So Black Moon Lilith, which, by the way, for those of you who don't remember or aren't sure which Black Moon Lilith I'm referring to here, this is the true node. She's a point in space. She's not an object. I'm not referring to the asteroid Lilith, of which there is an asteroid Lilith, which is a whole different ballgame. This is a point in space. Okay? So it's literally a shadow. It's what we've said no to and refused, but it's equally a part of ourselves, even though there's nothing technically tangible about it. There's an energetic pulse to it that's undeniable, and that we cannot, well, if we continue to resist it, it'll continue to perpetuate the shadow. So reconciling our feminine shadow potentiates room for true partnering, new alliances of women particularly, but not simply of women, but of women particularly, and women supporting and empowering other women in shared feminine sovereignty. Okay? This signature. Okay, thank you. Thank you for bearing with me with all the trials. Oh, we have another one here. We'll have to figure that one out. It's all good. I'm having fun. I hope you all are enjoying this too. Okay, so Chiron, Jupiter, Vesta, Eris, Sun, Mercury, Neptune. Also, if we feel like taking a deep breath now, because I know this is a lot of information, and as I mentioned, let it wash over you. Write down a sentence or a word or a planet or an asteroid that is intriguing you, and then just let it go, and then just stay here for the ride if you choose, okay? So Chiron, Vesta, Jupiter, Eris, and Sun, Moon, Neptune, Sun, Mercury, Neptune. These are what I'm speaking about here now. So the masculine in general, removed from the feminine, is without a purpose. It's essentially a mercenary, right? Fighting antiquated battles. Chiron in Aries here is very, very telling, okay? And we'll get to that again in a minute, but that's something to really, really take note of. For all this Aries, we cannot dismiss or ignore Chiron still here. So Aries is ruled by Mars, and Mars is ruled by by Mercury. They're in mutual reception here. Okay, so they're communicating with each other beneath and beyond what is readily obtainable through normal means of communication. There's a fresh mindset here with this Mercury and Sun here. Sun is on the Aries point. This is the cardinal point. This is the point where the Sun is, this is the point of individuation of the entire 360 degrees. This is where the bija, the seed of the template that is unique to each of us, but the human template of what it means to be an individual and carry our dharma forward as an individual for how to live, breathe, thrive, experience, make love, taste, touch, smell, how we gift what is ours to gift to the culture that we are born in. How do we fulfill our dharma, our destiny as a member of a culture, not separate from, not as an isolated unit, but together, yet singular. That is what individuation, as best as I can understand it, from what Carl Jung was talking about, who coined the term individuation, if I'm not mistaken. That was what his intention was. If I dare speak for Carl Jung, I could say that's whatever my experience of that is my experience of individuation. Okay. But yet the Sun, a few days before this Ingress chart, Mercury and the Sun came together with Neptune at 26 degrees of Pisces. Okay. And therewith, I don't have it here listed here, but there's a sheet. Sheat is a star in the constellation of Pegasus, the winged horse, which asks, what are we doing with our life force? Are we diffusing it? How are we making use of our life force? That is the question of this whole new Mercury cycle here in his superior conjunction with the Sun. Well, the latter half of his cycle with the Sun. So he's already started his new cycle as an evening star, Mercury. Mercury and the Sun opposing Ceres. This is, for me, other than this Mars here, this is the big ticket item. And again, those of you who know me, Ceres is who I am apprenticing to quite strongly for quite some time now and continue to. But Ceres here at the cardinal degree, when the Sun is at the cardinal degree, she is here for 3 of the 4 major cardinal ingresses this year. She is getting her solar initiation big time, again, in preparation for Venus in Leo. So if you haven't already gathered, I speak of Venus and Mars as the general wiring that we all carry for our inner masculine and our inner feminine. Okay? Again, men and women equally. The other asteroid goddesses, dwarf planets, are all facets for me of the feminine. Okay? They're facets of the feminine. They carry a particular facet of the crystal of the general feminine. Okay? That's how I'm orienting. So Ceres is retrograde here. She's closest to Earth. Retrogradation, including everything else it means, revisiting, reworking, remembering, all the re's, right? Essentially, at its nature, it's feminine because it is non-linear. Retrogradations, no matter what the planet, is bringing us into a non-linear, feminine, magnetic, receptive place. And that is why, in my opinion, we have generally such difficulty as a species with when planets go retrograde. A, because they're coming closer to Earth when they're retrograde. That's the case for all planets. So at the opposition, any planet at its opposition is always going to be closest to the Earth that it ever gets in its whole cycle. And so it's, whether we can see it or not, its energetic pulse is very, very strong on Earth. We feel that planet's energy, whether we can identify it or not. But I also feel retrogrades are scary and difficult because of the nonlinear space. We are so outward doing oriented that the natural cycle of ebb and flow, as a student of mine whose opinion I value, shared yesterday in our Venus class, there is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Both are needed. The sympathetic, if I'm saying this correctly, it's the fight or flight response. It's the defense, the natural need to defend, to keep us alive. But then there's the rest and digest of the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's why we have such burnout, right? We have autoimmune disease, we have adrenal fatigue, because we are constantly going and we don't know how to rest and receive. That is a vital part of the feminine principle. We are really, really, evolutionarily as a species, we're really, really being invited to remember and surrender into that reality. So I opened this in order to show you what a retrograde looks like. And also, if any of you have heard Gary Caton, he likes to say, and I'm in complete agreement because the astronomy shows it, that we really can't talk about retrograde periods or retrograde shadow periods in the way that they are intended, because a planet doesn't occupy the same space latitudinally when it returns back longitudinally to the same degrees, with very rare exceptions. See, there's some points that this would be an accurate representation of a shadow period of the planet, because this is where Ceres, in this case, was going over the very same place in both latitude and longitude in the chart. But look, there, it's like this openness. The retrograde is an open space. Okay. And that's what's so scary for us, these open spaces of receptivity. Mercury, opposite Ceres here. And the sun opposite Ceres here. Mercury as intermediary between the worlds, between the realms. He was the only god that could pass through all realms. Olympus, the god realm, the human realm, and the underworld. Ceres, the goddess of the underworld, as well as her daughter Persephone. I don't see them as separate. I see them as two facets of the same goddess. We are being reminded here that we have the capacity to traverse all worlds and remain whole. And in fact, our wholeness depends on our capacity and our availability to undergo our initiations within all realms, especially the shadow. Especially the shadow, simply because that's what we've been collectively screaming and avoiding at all costs, and blaming and gaslighting and culture wars arising from nobody wants to deal with the shadow. It's always projected outwardly. But the more we take accountability for our own unique access into where we are being called to surrender into our initiations, this is what is so potentiated here in this chart, with Mercury and the sun at the Aries point, Ceres right there closest to Earth. It's closer than when we think, and that's what makes it so scary. Okay. We are learning to orient from our center again, the sun, the solar logos, the sun as the collective consciousness in the mundane chart, but as the solar logos, the central intelligence and vitality of our human heart. The sun is always transducing information. We always see the sun as just beaming at us, right? But in fact, the sun is literally the parent of our solar system. The sun receives information from the cosmos like a parent bird, masticates the information and then transmits it to our solar system in language and food that we can understand. And equally, the sun is receiving from us, from the solar system, and beaming it back to cosmos. So all we ever really need is our center of intelligence to be in our human hearts, in our bodies, in our hara. Everything else gets taken care of. This is why those of you who have sat with me in a session or whatever know I'm also a big stickler and a huge proponent of heliacal cycles, because they put us as an individual by sign, house, and aspect in our relationship with the sun, collective, within us, in our hearts. That's where individuation bridges the gap between both and, or bridges the gap, crosses the divide between either or, and we become intimate with both and. Our sovereignty and our love contains the codes that we are here to live and be, that are our unique contribution to the collective. Our sun, our heliacal cycles, everything. Devoting ourselves to one planet and its relationship with the sun contains the kernel of everything, in my opinion. Okay. So, logos. We have come to misunderstand what logic is. In the work of philosopher and initiate in the Greek Western Mysteries, Peter Kingsley, in his books, he speaks about logos as being a gift from the goddess. That Parmenides and Empedocles and Zeno and the pre-Socratic philosopher shamans were initiates to the dark goddess. Not the evil goddess, but the dark mother goddess that nurtures and sustains and gives life to all. And they speak of logos as the thread, the gift from the goddess that threads us from her source of truth within us, that we are meant to tend and carry and devote ourselves to remain connected to the world of reality and of truth. And Aristotle and Socrates, whether purposefully or through ignorance, apparently mistranslated the Greek, probably maybe in some way because they couldn't understand it. They weren't initiates themselves. They couldn't receive the incantory language, incantere, which means to sing alive a teaching through a transmission, through poetic language, the language of the goddess, non-linear. Logos is non-linear. And yet logic has come to be so dry and about reason. Again, this is probably the battle of Mars here, part of the Mars. What are choices collectively? Do we continue to fight antiquated battles and choose for things to make sense, how we want them to make sense, to use reason, be reasonable? Or are we willing to surrender to logos, which comes from another world, which comes from the depths of the goddess, which lives in us, which lives in, guess what? The shadow. Okay, so I'm gonna move on a little bit here. Jupiter, Chiron, Vesta, and Eris. I'm just gonna read this. Our connection to what is fundamentally, instinctually, meaning Aries, Taurus, and Gemini are instinctual, right? Our connection to what is fundamentally true and knowable is broken. Yet we have an opportunity for being renewed at this Aries point, renewed in our relationship with the depths of ourselves, renewed with our relationship with Logos. We've had no faith that we can simply choose and have that be enough. That, wow, I can actually choose. We think of Mars and Aries about doing and action, but making a choice is an action too. It doesn't have an outward expression, but it does definitely has a physical manifestation somewhere down the road. So what are we choosing? And do we dare to become conscious of what we're choosing? And to know that we can make a new choice, and the simplicity of making a new choice in each moment, Aries, one moment, then the next moment, then the next moment, is enough. That if we can't see it right away, and we're still in the dark about it, but we keep doing it anyway, we keep going through and doing what is ours to do from a new place, from this heartful place of making my heart Hara as the center of me. And I just keep choosing in the dark until things start manifesting and showing. This is the faith we're asking to put our beliefs down in order to trust and have faith in our vulnerability to not know as we make these new choices. Longing for knowledge of ourselves becomes a reconnection to our instinctual devotion, Vesta, to honoring, fostering, and protecting at all costs our vital, immediate life force wisdom. This is the path to reclaiming our wholeness. Eris. Eris is the goddess, in very, very brief terms, devoted to our wholeness at all costs, to returning to the fact that she's an Aries. Our singularity, our singular nature contains our wholeness. Getting back to the whole individuation thing. I'm not going to go into more of that now. There'll be more on Eris coming later this year. But Eris and Chiron is also the raw nerve, a hijack of instinct to be in immediate relationship with all life, and instead becomes an automated impulse to maintain separation. So our instinct to be in immediate relationship with all life becomes an automated impulse to maintain a separation because we don't trust life. We don't trust ourselves. And are we still blaming the patriarchy, or are we starting down a fresh path? Now, the dark moon, the balsamic dark moon at this new Aries point. So prescient. The moon is with Arcanar, leaving the star Arcanar, which is the end of the river. Eridanus is the constellation. I call it the swan song of our current civilization. Okay? She's in a waning, so the end of the river. So we're literally coming to the end of the Taurus-Scorpio axis, and we're coming to the end of our ability to suppress our shadow anymore. It's coming up. It's all around us. We can't avoid it. The waning semisquare with Venus, Juno, and the sextile to Uranus. For me, that means it's letting go of perpetuating a romanticized future based on a detached and dissociated idealism from the past, or the comfort of our known tribe for safety. So we need to discover true safety in forming alliances with others who are grounded in the reality of change and be available to creatively adjust and adapt to newly arising and evolving conditions. Balsamic dark moons are always somehow associated with acknowledging and coming to terms with our fear of death. What is dying? What in us needs to die? As part of the natural cycle of things. Ceres, very much about cycles. Saturn, very much about cycles. The natural cycle of life. What do we need to just finally surrender and let go? This is the third new moon in a row that's conjunct a social or outer planet in a prior sign. In January, we had the Aquarius lunation conjunct Pluto in Capricorn, opposite Black Moon Lilith. In February, the Pisces lunation was conjunct Saturn in Aquarius. And this lunation is conjunct Neptune in Pisces, the collective unconscious, which I'm calling an inconvenient truth. So all these three new moons are succinctly illustrating that we cannot break free of our past. To stop running away from the past, to develop a new relationship with it. Running away from our past is putting the past in the shadow and not dealing with it. So at every one of these new moons, even at this Aries Ingress, there's still Neptune here to contend with. Crossing the divide. Okay. And the lunation in April is a solar eclipse, right? And this one is going to be with Eris and Jupiter in Aries. So there isn't going to be a major transpersonal or social planet in the sign prior. It's going to be with Eris. And boy, oh boy, Eris later on this year is going to have something to say as the nodal axis moves into Aries and Libra. And again, there's more coming on that. Okay. The moon is trine Pallas here, Pallas Athena in Cancer. And please ignore the houses. I didn't say that initially because this is from Edmonds, which is north of Seattle where I live. So the houses I'm not referencing the houses because this is just where I am. This has nothing to do with where you are, where we are collectively. So the houses are not anything I'm looking at. I'm simply looking at planets in their signs and in their aspectual relationships with one another, okay? Pallas Athena is on Ceres, also known as the Isis star. There's too much to go into with Ceres here, but Ceres is the bright star that heralded for the Egyptians the flooding of the Nile. Remember, I was talking about fecundating, bringing back the moisture of the dryness that has been, the moisture that's been squeezed out of the patriarchy through Pluto's transit through Capricorn. Pallas Athena helping to fecundate through the feminine mysteries. Because Ceres was also known as the Isis star, and Isis was, in some belief systems or schools of thought, mystery schools, the origin of the feminine mysteries. She was the goddess associated with the deeper feminine mysteries of life and death, kin to Ceres. Dying before you die, to experience the eternal as a human. So Pallas is also squaring the Chiron Jupiter Vesta thing here. Challenging safety of strategizing a way out of a system within the parameters of the same system, or engaging in social activism sourced in fear and security needs. In other words, fighting the system, because Pallas Athene can often indicate social activism. She's the goddess of the cause. She's also the goddess of our unique feminine path to embodied wisdom. But she can also manifest as fighting for the cause, fighting for social justice, and taking it very personally, making everything personal with Cancer. Okay? The invitation is to root in a new octave of an ancient feminine wisdom, or otherwise known as natural law, which is accurate for our time, natural law that is accurate for our time and honoring of individual sovereignty. Cancer, sextile Uranus, the individual sovereignty, the freedom to be our unique individual self. This threads us back into our unique creative intelligence to illuminate and seed a way forward concurrent with and within the dying paradigm. So one of the things that we forget about Scorpio, and we forget about the process of dying, is intimately involved, like a lover in relationship with the death process, is the process of being reborn, and vice versa. But we tend to focus on the negative. Scorpio can be negativity as well. What's wrong? What's not working? What am I losing? Rather than I'm trusting in the surrender to discover what will naturally self-arise in its place, that is more honest, that is more organic, that is more me, more truly me, sourced from a real place within me, sourced from the logos. There's also Aquarius and Uranus for me is where we can access multiple realities at once. And for me, that's the hallmark of the Aquarian age, is grounding in which timeline we want to be in, which is not a choice that comes from our heads. It comes from our hearts. And to stay and not get blown out or overwhelmed by so many choices that dissociation can bring on. There's too much. I overwhelm myself. I can't pick. Chiron in Aries. Choose one thing. Just choose one thing and make that yours. Become intimate with that one thing. If that's all you can do, which that's enough. Being full and heartfelt and committed and devotional toward whatever we are committing to, fully engaged as much as we are able at any one moment, that is way better than picking too much and overwhelming ourselves and not being able to receive or move forward with anything. Okay, I'm going to move on. There's always more, but I'm going to move on. So the trifecta of what I call the theme of the year, the uninvited guest is inviting herself. That would be Eris. Anybody knows the myth of Eris? And again, I'm not going to go into it here, but you can watch some of my YouTube video with Astrology Hub. If you just Google Astrology Hub, Eris, Andrea Michelle, you'll find it. This is the very beginning of what I'm getting with Eris, but she's the uninvited guest, but she's definitely coming. Black Moon Lilith, quincunx, the Sun and Mercury. Again, the aspect of no relationship. The collective consciousness, our collective consciousness, is still not available for relationship with our wild, uncontrolled, feminine, creative potency. But yet it's on the Aries point. So again, coming back to choice, we each can choose whether or not the collective is doing it. How much are we attenuated to what everybody else around me is doing versus what's in my heart to choose and do? It literally is swimming upstream. And any of you who've done any serious spiritual practice and inner work know that it's a constant recommitting to not resting on what we've done before, but a constant recommitment to coming back from the ground up. I love the Dalai Lama says he does his preliminary practices every day. He's an enlightened being. He doesn't take it for granted. He comes back to the preliminary, the foundational practices, the foundational structures. Keeps us humble. And humility, humbleness means on our own ground. The ground of the reality that is us, that lives in us. Okay? A new octave of bridging the masculine and feminine consciousness. Mercury is the hermaphrodite. One of the divides that we're crossing. We're coming into a period of a real octave of the solar feminine with all of this that I'm speaking to here, with the Venus and Leo cycle, with Venus's last superior conjunction with the Sun in October. Super powerful at 29 degrees of Libra, her sign. Mars's October or December opposition with the Sun, with the Moon. Venus with the sun, Mars with the moon, solar feminine and the lunar masculine. Where have we just exhausted either or? It has to be one or the other. Ceres is inconjunct the south node. She's our blind spot, another blind spot. And she's quincunx the north node. She was last touched by the north node. And as we remember, that means she can be more valence toward being tipped toward what's new, what's coming, and all the significations that I mentioned here. Ceres is also at her dark moon phase of her morning star period. The exact Ceres Sun opposition happens a day after this Ingress chart. One of the things we can be surrendering is the Libra social laws, rules, and ethical standards, where Saturn is exalted, right? Rules, and maturing our sense of what's fair. Oftentimes, Ceres can manifest as entitlement, hidden, secret resentment and entitlement. I'm not getting what I deserve. Things are not going the way that I want. It's not fair, especially in Libra. It's not fair that I have to undergo these initiations. You do it for me, which is a sign of how codependent we become on things outside of our natures, whether it's a parent or a teacher or a system or a social group. How willing are we to acknowledge how much we have outsourced our power to somebody else to do it for us? So maturing to get deeper underneath the superficial ideas of fairness, of ethics, the right thing, the wrong thing to do, and return to logos. Okay, I'm not going to go through the supergalactic center and all that, but Ceres does bridge, because she's in between Mars and Jupiter, she bridges the inner planets in this case meaning the personal planets, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, and the social planets. So there's that divide that the asteroid goddesses cross as well, and the asteroid belt, literally astronomically, they're between Mars and Jupiter. And Ceres and the asteroid goddesses are the only aspects of the feminine. Venus cannot get further than 48 degrees from the sun, maybe 49. So at most, she can get within a semi-square. So as I mentioned, all these asteroid goddesses are facets of the feminine. Well, guess what? Because they're outers, they can have an opposition. They are feminine in nature, but they can have an opposition to the sun, like the boys, like Mars, like Jupiter, like Saturn, all the others out there. So she's crossing that divide of what was possible. Fluidity. This is a really, really powerful time if we are receptive to it and available for whatever our work is, our inner work to do, to receive so much grace in trusting ourselves in the dark, having access to more than we knew we were capable of or available for. Okay. I just want to bring in this slide, which I used in my presentation on Ceres, which is on YouTube. Ceres as Demeter Thesmophoros, which is a Greek epithet for her. Demeter is her Greek name. Thesmophoros means lawgiver. Okay. Essentially, and again, I'm going to leave this recorded up here. I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can go over it later during the recording. But when I was talking about logos as the gift, the thread from the dark feminine, when I'm talking about the thread, it's very much, it's akin to, in the Buddhist Tantra tradition, they talk about, well, in the Buddhist tradition of Tantra, Tantra is like the thread. It's the connecting vitality, the vitality that connects, that wants to bridge the known and the unknown, the masculine and feminine, the impulse to evolve, the impulse to become more. to embody more, whatever it be, to reach higher levels of consciousness, deeper levels of embodiment. Ceres is definitely acting on behalf of the dark goddess for us as lawgiver. The law comes from Logos. And Ceres is, when I mentioned that all of the feminine goddesses are devoted to something, for me, Ceres is devoted to the return of natural law, natural processes, and our natural abundant generosity. She's the source. The Greeks saw her as Thesmophoros, as the source of the laws and rituals of the natural world. Returning to law beyond legislation. Okay. One last thing. The moon is in a sesquisquare to the south node. Sesquisquares are meant to curb excesses of the trine. It can be very uncomfortable. Again, dissociation and victimization and martyrdom will be the only recourse for most of us for safety. All good. What are we choosing? If that's all we can choose, that's what we can choose. Becoming honest, transparent. Sun, Mercury, and Ceres forming, the Sun, Mercury, Ceres formation is forming an inconjunct to the, Sun, Mercury, and Ceres is forming an inconjunct to the nodal axis. So what this tells me is this time, this period of initiation that Ceres is inviting us into, that everything is inviting us into, but Ceres, I mean, other than Black Moon Lilith, and the South Node, they're the only ones on this side of the chart, really. Everything is up here. So it's very lonely to initiate against the current of prevailing society, right? So it's only available to those willing to look. This is available. Look where? Look internally. It will take an extra effort and a willingness to go against the grain of what the majority will be doing, to not get sucked up in the chaos, to not get sucked up in the dissociation. If we dissociate, can we come back? One thing at a time. Just pick what I can do. Form a relationship with that in me. So it takes extra effort and a willingness to go against the grain of what the majority will be doing to make use of the growth edges and initiatory opportunities that Ceres transimminence is what I call her, with Mercury offers. This is kind of based on when I said that Ceres can go where Venus can't, and the asteroid goddesses can go where Venus can't. Normally, a planet in opposition to the sun is in a transcendence phase. It's up and out. But Ceres is very much the goddess of embodiment, of embodied experience, of earned wisdom. By the way, Ceres was the only one of the Olympian gods that became human for a time. And that's why, in my experience, she is uniquely positioned to help us go through our initiatory experiences as humans this time, and where we have avoided our initiations as humans in the past, where we've made being a human less than, somehow not enough. Where in us is that deficiency place where we believe the story that we are somehow, how often do we hear we are a parasite on the earth? The earth would be much better off without humans. How horrible is that? That it's assuming and implying that we don't belong here, that we don't have a natural place in the natural order. Because we've gotten so far away from the natural order and natural law, we actually, in our deep shadow, believe that. So where can we start to address these belief systems that somehow we don't have a place? We can't find our way back to natural order. So the transimminence is my bastardized words for transcendence and immanence. Bridging the divide between what it can mean to stay in our bodies as we transcend and go beyond what we've known before in levels of consciousness we hadn't known, and also in our access to truth, depths. Immanent comes from the Latin immanere, which is to dwell in, to remain in body in transcendent experiences. That's it. I have a little bit of a recap here. I love this image. I found it on Pinterest. One of my clients got me interested in Pinterest, and now it's kind of like crack in a certain way. I love these images. And I don't know who the artist is to credit them, but it's titled "Big Things Have Small Beginnings." So again, as I mentioned in the beginning, there's a lot happening. I don't need to tell you, but there's so much in the chart that we can just focus on, whether it's Mars, our Mars. Where is the Mars of this chart reflecting our Mars? And also what we have in Gemini. There's many ways we can work with this. And of course, I'm happy to work with anybody. And I have other additional resources down here. Before I get there, volunteer to go into our blind spots before they get any more dramatic or in our face. Volunteer. The universe will respond in kind in terms of, wow, this person is really choosing in the dark. They don't know what they're doing. They're scared, and they're choosing one step at a time anyway. This heralds an initiate. To focus locally, inwardly, is focusing socially, globally, and collectively. That is the beauty and benefit of individuation. Bringing coherence and refining consciousness for the integration of our instinctual nature. I do want to give this example. My students are going to be sick and tired of me bringing up this example, but my octopus teacher, one of my favorite documentaries ever. And if you haven't seen it, please see it. It's just, you won't regret it. In the very beginning, where the man speaks about going into the cold, cold ocean, day in, day out, talk about devotion, without a wetsuit, because he knew that having the wetsuit on would be one more barrier between him and the natural world of the ocean. And he spoke about how going into the ocean day after day, after a year's time, his body began to crave the cold. And he spoke about all of his brain, his all different aspects of his body coming online, parts of his brain. This is what I'm talking about. This is what Aries is in devotion to. Wholeness, including the triune brain. Bringing back online the reptilian, the mammalian, and the neocortex. We are so neocortex oriented. Mars out of bounds in Gemini. Completely disengaged from our hijacked instinctual nature. Our capacity to understand and know ourselves as part of our environment immediately. You hear about these trackers in the bush in Africa who literally can see, smell, sense the animal, communicating with the animal that they are tracking. The animal preparing itself to give itself over to the hunter. This is what it means to be so in tune. This is what the wisdom intelligence inherent in our instinctual nature, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, what it can be. But it's been hijacked, and now it's just fight or flight, nervous system response, because we're so in our heads and outside of our bodies. The masculine and feminine becoming more fluid and full spectrum. As I mentioned earlier, the lunar masculine and the solar feminine. Integrating past becomes the ground of the emergent resources and adaptability within a fuller range of experiences. This is organic creative intelligence. And vitalizing our thread back to the lawgiver, which is not something outside of ourselves. She lives within us. And those of you who also have been working with me know that I don't see the planets as archetypes. I treat them and am in relationship with them to the extent I am as wisdom streams. They themselves have sentience. They themselves are evolving. They themselves seek to have a relationship with us. They're not just these kind of like objective things that we have to force ourselves to fit into a particular archetype or control the archetype to try to fit into us because we don't want to change. It's a dynamic relationship. So for me, vitalizing the thread back to our lawgiver, back to the dark goddess, is commitment, requires commitment or devotion. If you're wired for devotion like me, it's devotion. That's your way back. Tending to the fire, the inner flame of devotion in our heart, the warm inner fire of devotion, literally magnetizes to us that which we are devoted to. We don't need to go out and seek it. It is just our task to tend to the inner flame. I have a page on my website. It's a resources page with people that I have worked with, people that I highly recommend, mentors, facilitators, for any of you who are like, okay, Andrea, well, how do we go about attending to these initiations and all that? precioushumanbirth.com/resources. I myself am starting to offer these devotional journeys, because this is what I'm discovering is what my wiring is for. Intimate one-on-one or smaller groups where we go deep, being willing to just not know and be in a space of openness and receptivity. These are the cauldrons of what I'm calling devotional journeys that I am very, very excited about. And I have a wee group, a wee pod. Some of my ladies are here that we've been journeying with. And it's just very, very rich what we go into.